Welcome to Chapter 6, Basic ICD 10 Coding Guidelines. A couple of things with this chapter, a little heads up, is that I'm going to be bringing in the electronic ICD 10 CM book. So keep in mind that this electronic book is set up just like your paper book. And it's really important for students to learn how to utilize the paper book. That's why, again, because let's say you are coding at home, power goes out and you still have to get your work done. So you may have to resort to going ahead and using the paper book. So again, next year we will be using the electronic book when we get to advanced, but this year we're going to concentrate on the paper. Okay, so let's just go through the guidelines here. So with the guidelines, we are going to, what we have today is going to be throughout the whole ICD-10 CM classification. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the basic principle. So again, I cannot emphasize enough how both the tabular and the alpha must be used. Again, you need to locate it in the index and then double check it in the tabular. The index does not provide a full code. Sometimes it does, but you as a beginning coder, you do not know that. So again, that's why it's very important for you to utilize both. Otherwise, you will have incorrect codes. And then assign that code to the highest level of detail. So if you have a 3-character code, you really do need to look to make sure there's not 4 characters. So if there's 4 characters, you look to see if there's 5. And we have 5, 6, 6 is 7. 7 again is the highest we can go. Okay, so all characters must be used. None can be omitted. So with that, if we have a code, we need to use that placeholder X. So this should be assigned for all characters less than 6. And if you have that 7th character in there, again, you need to make sure you look for that 7th character. And then if there isn't a 5th and 6th, you need to put that X in there, that placeholder. Okay, so here's just a few things when basic coding principles. So if I look at the tabular list, J40 bronchitis is not specified as acute or chronic. So it has no 4th character subdivisions. So therefore, we just code J40. Acute appendicitis is K35. This in category includes 4th characters. So again, we need more information so we can go ahead and assign more codes, or not more codes, more characters. All right, so we have category J45 asthma. This has 4th character subdivisions. So again, it also uses a final character. So when you're in the back of the book in the tabular section, make sure you add those characters. Okay, again, I cannot emphasize enough how you find the code in the alpha and you double check it in the tabular. Okay, so let's go. Here's an example. We have T27, which is a burn. And when I look that up in the back, okay, it gives me T27, let's just say 0.0. And if you look up in the little gray book, or in the category here, T27, you have that little gray box, which gives you the 7th character. Okay, with that 7th character, there's not a 5th or 6th character, so I have to put placeholders in there. Okay, assign residual codes. Again, follow the rules. So an unspecified code should never be assigned without careful review. Combination codes, okay? So when we have combination codes, these could be located in the index with reference to, with, due to, in, and associated with. Sometimes your combination codes are going to be right there in your alpha. Other times you have to look in the tabular to get those 2 diagnoses. So again, it's very important. Just the other day in advanced coding, we had a code, we were coding a chart and a student said, and I said to her, where did you find that extra code? Because nobody else had it. And she said, when I looked it up in the back of the book, it says use an additional code, so that's where she found that extra code. All right, so multiple codes, again, kind of just what I stated. So multiple code is the use of more than one code to fully identify the components of the diagnostic statement. So keep in mind, and I've said this earlier, if I have my statement and one code covers everything in that statement, I'm good. But if there's part of that statement that is not covered, I need to find another code then that's going to make it work. And that's where we get for dual classification, okay? So again, it could tell you you need an additional code. So at that point, make sure you look for that same code. It could tell you to code this first before the other code, so make sure you abide by those rules. Dual coding, kind of the same thing we're looking at, okay? So let's go on to code, if applicable, any casual condition first. So this basically is stating that, let's have an example, we have retention of urine. It requires that the code to identify an enlarged prostate to be assigned as the first listed code or principal diagnosis. So basically what it's telling you that N40.1 needs to be first, and then R33.8 would be our second code. So when writing these out, you don't have to put them in, just separate them by a comma when writing out your homework. Okay, you don't have to put them in the parentheses that they're showing. Use an additional code. Okay, so an example here, it says urinary tract infection requires an additional code to identify the organism, such as a positive culture of E. coli. So that's what it's telling you when I code a UTI, that I have to look to see if there's an organism present, okay? Because if somebody has an infection, they should have an organism present that's causing that infection. Sometimes we don't know what it is, but if they're telling you what it is, you need to code it. Okay, again, and discriminate multiple coding. Okay, so let's say just on the basis of diagnostic test, okay, if I am a chest x-ray and they're telling me that the patient has infiltrates, I can't code them unless the doctor or basically the physician tells you that this is in the diagnosis, okay? Another thing, lab. If a patient has low hemoglobin, you can't assume that it is going to be anemia. Okay, so again, this differs from coding practices in outpatient setting. Again, everything has to be interpreted by the physician. All right, so let's go ahead. The other big thing here, laterality. Again, we're looking at when a patient has a bilateral condition, example, cataracts in both eyes. Each side is treated during separate encounters. The first encounter to treat the first side, assign the bilateral code because condition still exists on both sides. For the second encounter, you assign the appropriate unilateral code, and it's going to tell you right or left. Again, with ICD-10, it's always going to state your documentation should tell you if it's, again, left or right or possibly both. Okay, here is a very, very important rule. You really need to write this in your textbook. This will come back next year, all through this semester. So let's start off here with inpatient. So if I have a diagnosis for an inpatient, okay, so again, if their status is inpatient, and the diagnosis states possible, probable, suspected, likely, questionable, or rule out at the time of discharge, okay, so you're looking at the documentation, you code it as if it were established. So let's talk about here, the patient had probable, I'm an inpatient again, appendicitis, probable appendicitis, or questionable appendicitis, and I'm an inpatient. I code it as if they have it. So my code's going to be appendicitis. Okay. Other terms that fit, they have consistent with, compatible with, suggestive of, all those. Again, this is just inpatient. Okay, what are my exceptions for inpatient? if the patient has probable HIV infection, okay, you cannot code that. You cannot code anything with HIV if it's probable. Now, if it says patient does have HIV, then you can code it. But if it says questionable HIV, rule out HIV, you cannot code it. You're going to code symptoms that they have. So outpatient's a totally different story. If I am an outpatient, observation, ER, and if I'm in an outpatient setting and it says probable appendicitis, then I cannot code it, okay? I have to code like abdominal pain or whatever they came in for. Just because with this, they haven't run all the tests in an outpatient setting. And I'm not, again, I don't have enough information to code it that way. So again, outpatient, you cannot code probable, questionable, any of those. All right, so the other thing, again, that if I'm in an inpatient and it says probable epilepsy, I cannot code that. Probable HIV disease, I cannot code that. Multiple sclerosis, I cannot code that. I cannot code them as they're established. Any other in an inpatient setting, I can code. Probable appendicitis, probable myocardial infarction, probable cholecystitis. Any of those I can code as if they have that condition. Again, if it's outpatient, I have to code the signs or symptoms. So one thing when coding, always look at scenarios if it's inpatient or outpatient. Here's another big rule. Rule out or ruled out. This little D right here makes a huge difference. Okay, so rule out, inpatient setting, I can code it as if it's established. So if it says rule out cholecystitis, I code it as if they have it because they're thinking that it's happening. But now just on the opposite inpatient, if it says ruled out, that means they ruled it out, that they do not have cholecystitis, and I probably have to code either, abdominal pain or whatever they came in with. Okay, so that one little letter, that D, makes a huge difference. Okay, borderline diagnosis, again, you need to be, your code is confirmed unless classification provides a specific entry. So with those, just look at the documentation. Sign or symptom. Okay, when coding professionals make every attempt to report specific diagnosis, sign or symptom unspecified codes, they're acceptable. So again, the only thing I have to say about signs and symptoms, you are going to code them if they're not related to that principal diagnosis. So if I'm coming in for chest pain and my diagnosis is myocardial infarction, what happens here is that I cannot code the chest pain because it's related to the infarction. Okay, acute and chronic symptoms. Acute system or acute symptom, sorry about that. So if I have acute and chronic and they're both at the same indentation level, okay, I code them both. If they're different, I, again, probably best here, I'm going to pull up a book. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop this presentation. And please join me on the next one so I can explain acute and chronic much better.